Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Our guest today is a writer, voice actor, and game designer. His most recent work is on the Welcome to Night Vale tabletop RPG. Please welcome Carlos Cabrera to Epic Realms. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Thank you for having me.
To start off, tell us a little bit about a young Carlos, a young you growing up. How did you kind of like were you a geek when you were a kid, or was that something that developed as you grew up?
Yeah, so my father started all of my brothers and I on video games really, really early. Well, I had two older brothers that were all in the same house at one point with my
Okay.
younger sister, and each one of us brothers had a different video game console. I had the Intellivision,
Oh wow.
one of them had the ColecoVision, and another one had a Vectrex.
I don't even remember
So
the Vectrex. I don't remember
yeah,
that
that
one.
that was like just the dot and lines like asteroid game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like classic Pong, stuff like that. And then I eventually upgraded to the Nintendo and the Sega Genesis and going on from there. But I was probably, I think it was 10 years old, and I had gotten the X-Men 2 video game for the Sega Genesis. And well, actually, that was the birthday present that I got that year, but I was also playing Flashback, The Quest for Identity, and I was just like, this is what I want to do at some point for the rest of my life. Um, and then I went to school on the East Coast for multimedia design, so graphic design, web design, a little
Okay.
bit of business. When I first went into college, they didn't actually have any sort of video game degrees until right before I graduated from the East
Oh
Coast.
wow.
So then I went from the East Coast to San Francisco and then up to Seattle, and then just started opening up my own business and doing freelancing from there.
That's really cool. When you were in high school and stuff, did you do any role playing stuff then, or even did you know about it? Was it in your peripheral?
Yeah, so I actually got into the second edition of Magic the Gathering back in high school,
Okay, yeah.
as well as playing the second edition of AD&D with all my friends in the library when school closed.
Okay.
So we would have most of our campaigns run through that. We would play other games and systems at home. I did Old World of Darkness. I did some Birthright, classic Greyhawk, some homebrew stuff that one of my friends was running. I had the case of like a buddy of mine was basically our forever GM.
Yeah.
So he didn't really get to play the a chance to play very often, but he ran pretty much most of our games. And then I started coming up with my own ideas for campaign setting I always wanted to create one day. And he was just like, Carlos, you are the only person I know that's probably crazy enough to do this.
did role playing or video games or anything like that, did that interfere with schoolwork? Did you have to like, oh, I got to put that aside, otherwise it'll overtake my life, or was it pretty easy for you to balance those?
I would say it was pretty easy to balance those. I'm probably guilty of playing hooky in high school a couple of times to play more video games, but it was never really a big issue.
Right.
Um, I actually had a friend of mine who went into the same multimedia degree that we both had in college. So we were already commuting together, being gaming buddies to those first early years.
Okay.
But I went to high school and college on the East Coast in New England. So I was in Massachusetts growing up and then went to Rhode Island for college,
Okay.
just doing the commute back and forth. But back then, I was like maybe one of five people who did not go to UMass Dartmouth when they graduated. So after I did that in Rhode Island to do multimedia design before I graduated, that's when the game design degrees were actually coming out in colleges. So I went from New England to San Francisco. Hilariously, the art institutes, which no longer exist anymore,
Right.
was the first place I found game design degrees. So I went up to San Francisco. School was okay, but I had a whole string of bad living situations. Then I was like, well, I'm going up to Seattle, and pretty much have never left since.
Okay. Well, Seattle's a beautiful place. I was there not too long ago, as you
It's
know, as you
nice.
know. What other inspirations did you have growing up for in the geek genre, as far as like movies and books and stuff like that? Was that, I'm assuming that was also something, if you're playing video games and you're doing role playing stuff, I'm assuming movies and books are there too.
Yeah, I read a good section or a good chunk of the classic Dragonlance novels,
Okay.
but mostly it was video games and movies. I actually wanted to go to um, game design for video games specifically,
Okay.
but I noticed that the trend in college was that they were all basically teaching everyone the same tools and the same techniques, and I wanted to do something a little bit differently. So when I wanted to go to Seattle from San Francisco, I decided to actually fall back on the degree I had from the East Coast for multimedia design
Hmm.
and just created my own LLC, which is Something Clever Games in 2015, and then started doing freelance work right after that.
Awesome. I read that you had done some journalism stuff as far as the RPG work goes too. You want to tell us a little bit about that and how you got into that?
Yeah, so there was a website that used to exist around 2000, 2005 called Game Helper, where they would do not only like a game fact integrated like tip line, but also just do press and articles for video games.
Okay.
So I actually started that while I was in San Francisco. Um, the World Cyber Games was an event I actually covered like way back in 2004. So like really at the early stages of esports,
Yeah.
way back then, well, 20 years ago. Um, and covered those events and even did a couple of like Japanese import games on the GameCube back in the day. So I guess I started writing really early first and then sort of made the hop into game design after that.
Is that one of those things where you sign up and they like maybe give you a couple bucks or maybe give you nothing at all, but you get that recognition foot in the door?
Well, at the time, the owner of the website was like basically trying to make the next version of G4. Ultimately, it didn't really take off, but it was definitely being able to get access to the press, seeing that side of the industry, and getting, of course, we love free copies of the game.
Right. Right. And then did that transition into the other stuff or was it kind of all around the same time and just both just happened?
It wasn't right away. I did that writing about 2004, 2005. And then 2010, I did actually travel from Seattle back to the East Coast to try to get something off of the ground to like go back home, meet with my high school friends, see if I can get something off the ground that way. That didn't end up working, and plus I couldn't really find like any other job besides pumping gas at the time.
Right.
So I'm like, well, I'm going back to Seattle where the money was at. I was working physical security at corporate offices in the downtown area, and that's something I've been doing actually for about 15 years now, just to pay the bills.
Yeah.
But I've been doing it for so long, it's actually been very, very beneficial to help me do all the game stuff I've wanted to do.
Oh, really? In what way is it beneficial as far as game design? Just like the information you get and like how things work or just connecting with people?
So the security industry, if anything else, helps me play rogues better in my RPGs.
Nice.
But having a stable job to fall back on while I was doing my freelancing and opening up the business has been really, really helpful. Being an essential worker during the pandemic was a little bit tough, but my company in 2020 just really started taking care of people, making sure that, we were staying safe and being taken care of. And I basically stuck with the same group for the past 15 years.
Okay. When we talk about you starting your own business, your own LLC, what kind of stuff are you creating with that?
So I started that in 2015. That's when I filed the business. And then 2016 got my first voiceover gig. And then 2017 started doing RPG work for the first time. It actually took me about 5 years of going to PaizoCon, which no longer has a physical show, but I was just boots on the ground, networking, trying to
Right.
show my work off to people. And that's when I linked up with Legendary Games for my first paid RPG assignment. Um, the voice acting gig I did was basically just through all of my connections that I had here in Seattle from living here for a few years. I remember it was like probably the first year I was in Seattle. I went to my bank in a World of Warcraft sweatshirt. And the fact that the bank manager knew what that was and played the game, I'm like, oh, this is the best spot for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. When you're doing the voice acting, what kind of like did they just come to you? You said that there were these connections. Did they come to you and be like, "Hey, you want to do voice acting?" Or did you go to them, or were you like sending in tapes?
So they actually put out a call on social media, I think Facebook back at the time. It was a company called Imago Software. They did the Star Mazer DSP side-scrolling shoot 'em up, which is available on Steam. And I got to be one of the voices in their pilot randomizer that you can choose at the start of the level,
Okay.
and then you play through, the first few stages of the game that they were at least hopefully going to put into a full version of the game later on. But that sort of exposed me to how voice acting works, how you can write dialogue for the actors itself, and how that gets implemented. There's a sound studio called Impossible Acoustics here in Seattle that I went to. I've been dying to give them more work through the voice acting stuff, but for the most part, the tabletop RPG stuff has been really working out for me.
Yeah, I was curious if they were gonna if they like just send you to a place or you're like doing it in house at your own or how that whole thing worked out because all the voice actors we've had on have different experiences as far as voice work goes and how that process is and depending on the time frame like what years it is in really shifts as well.
There was one assignment that I got. I was doing a NPC in the Fate of the Future Pathfinder special. It was the very first time that Pathfinder and Starfinder crossed over.
Okay.
And that was at Gen Con 2021 when they did that special event. That was just me recording at home on my laptop and sending that file in. I know a lot of people usually just have like a Yeti mic in their laptop when they're on the road.
Yeah.
So I had like the bare minimum, it's even what I'm using right now.
Right.
But that sort of was an opportunity that I was able to do because I already had some voice acting experience. And just casually playing Pathfinder, I was playing a game with an illustrator at Undead Labs, and they put out a call that they wanted to get some POC folks in to do face scans for the game, and I am a playable zombie survivor in State of Decay 2.
Awesome. That's awesome. You mentioned getting your first RPG work.
Yeah.
How did that process facilitate? Because you're like, hey, I'm finally doing this for a recognized company, and then how did that transition into going to Paizo?
Yeah, so Jason with Legendary Games had often used a lot of new freelancers and gave them a chance to basically open the door for people. And Paizo, I mean, even today, I think they still do, uses Legendary Games as a really good source for new freelancers coming to the business. So I had shown Jason Nelson what homebrew Pathfinder first edition stuff that I was working on, and that's what gave me my first assignment writing for them. I did 5 monsters in the Thera Field Guide, which is the science fiction setting for Pathfinder First Edition. And after that, did a couple more freelance jobs. I did actually the material I initially showed Jason made it into the Wayfinder or Pathways. Sorry, the Pathways article that I wrote for like high level spells and just what can happen in high level planner play when there's like a magical mishap
Yeah.
between planes of existence.
Right.
And that was sort of like a key component of what I wanted to do for homebrew that I actually was able to get published, luckily.
That's really fun when you can like you have something and you're like, this is really good. I want to share this with the world, and you can get it out there like that.
And usually if it's material that you are, telling your developers or the companies that you want to work for that you want to complete, it looks really, really good. And you're like, okay, do this. And then like a week or two later, you're like, done. Like it's already
Yeah,
finished.
you already got it in your brain hole.
Yeah.
So you end up starting to work for Pathfinder. What was it like going from, hey, you're doing indie stuff, working with a third party group, and their deadlines are what they need, and then going to Paizo and their process? What was that shift like for you?
That was interesting because I had uh was basically, I mean, still going to PaizoCon when they still had their physical shows at the time. And I'd already had a few third-party assignments under my belt at that point. So I was just talking to the right Paizo folks to find out what book or line would be right for what I wanted to create. And I had the opportunity to speak to Luis Loza at Paizo. And we were in a room playing Mario Kart just casually with a bunch of people at PaizoCon. And Luis says, if you let me win this match, I'll give you your first assignment. But I still brought my A game and he beat me fair and square. So
Nice.
it worked out in the end.
That's a great story about
Yeah.
you get that feel of camaraderie like behind the scenes, right? Where it's just like people just hanging out having fun at places
Yep.
like that and you're making connections just because that's when you enjoy people's company.
And Paizo's a great company for that too. They also attend just casually several of the smaller conventions that we have here in the Seattle area, and they're very approachable and very easy to talk to. It's been pretty great.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's talk about some of your official Paizo work because you've worked on some really big stuff. It's not just like little pieces here and there, right? You've done some bigger things. Talk about some of the most fulfilling work that you've done with Paizo.
So the first assignment that I got with Luis was actually pretty cool because he's basically the key component of Paizo, writing for the uh, Arcadia realm that everyone's been dying to have a book for Pathfinder for a while now. But we sort of have a shared Mexican history, and I was able to write what the Calaca skeletal bard monster was in that first assignment that I ever did. And what's fun about Paizo is that they'll also have cultural holidays that they'll present on their blogs. So, in addition to that, I wrote a memory guitar that you could find in the possession of one of these creatures that sort of like helps the Kalaka remember like who it was in its past life, or instill memories in you that you remember from a long time ago. And just being able to build on that kind of stuff is really really fun. Um, I did a I did an NPC article for Lost Omens Legends, and that was the book with second edition Pathfinder that basically said, here are our most famous first edition NPCs that are going to be still with us in the second edition. Let's update them, let people know what they're up to, give you a handful of story hooks, stuff like that. I did uh, Pack Broker um, Hashim Ibn Seed, I think his name is. And that was a good chance to basically say, this is what's happening in the realm of Katapesh. These include the Veiled Masters, who used to be the Aboleths in first edition, but they upgraded them to their own creature type in
Oh,
second edition to sort
okay.
of separate that from, the old D&D stuff.
Yeah,
And the reason I loved writing him was that his kind had a point in a previous adventure path where the old island nation of Aslant was risen from the sea. And at the very, very end of that AP, there was some information about these other characters for these creatures. So I was able to use like a whole full page of dialogue about this NPC, not only being one of them, but also communicating with the others to basically form their schemes.
that's really cool.
So having the chance to like take one little piece of information and expand upon it in other books is probably one of my favorite things I've done for Paizo.
Yeah, and just the lore, being able to add to a lore that's already so
Yeah.
vast, right? You mentioned
Um,
the. Go ahead.
oh, I was going to say that there was also a couple things I did sort of in that realm with some of the siege castles that surround Absalom, like all of the previous attempts to take over the city that failed. And continuing that sort of line, one of those specific veiled masters is an enemy in one of those encounters as you go through the siege castle and find out what lies beneath.
Oh,
So I'm hoping one day I can continue that line further in another product, but we'll see.
yeah. Let's see. Eyes. Keep your eyes out, everybody. Keep your eyes out.
Yeah.
You mentioned the first edition, second edition transition.
Mhm.
What was that like for you as a as a person that wasn't like high up at the top making all the decisions? How was that for you when that information came out and like this is the direction we're going?
It was kind of a wild announcement, I remember, but the way that they started pushing out their content to preview what was coming, I just sort of became a really big fan of the system and wanted to see what it could do. Um, Especially with, when such a big publishing house comes up with an announcement like that, they're creating an entirely new edition of the game, you start wondering what material from the previous edition can you still use or carry over.
Yeah.
And that was always kind of like a fun design challenge for me.
Yeah.
Um, Also, there was some random homebrew stuff like some barge feats that I wanted to make back in first edition that I was also able to put into second edition in the the player core book. I did some barge feats that ended up being in the first edition advanced player's guide, but they did a really great job of keeping track of who worked on those previous books and notified those writers for with their materials being picked up for second edition. And once the second edition player core came out, as of last year at Gen Con, everyone who worked on the player core got the silver ENNIE for best rules that year.
That's awesome. And thus, any award-winning game designer.
Hooray!
Hooray! Let's talk a little bit about Kingmaker. You okay with that?
Yeah, sure.
Did you play the video game at all, and what was your thoughts on that crossover? Because you, as a video game person,
Yes.
Kingmaker, video game, RPG setting, it's kind of like this match made in heaven.
Yeah, so I definitely played some of the video game. Computer RPGs were probably a lot of what I played back in the day too. I was always a big fan of the old Neverwinter games. I also kind of miss the fact that like the classic Neverwinter games had such an involved level editor, so that people were actually running their campaigns virtually through Neverwinter
Right,
Nights, which was kind of fun to hear
right.
about. But when Kingmaker came around, I played the. Not only did I play the video game, but the anniversary edition was basically an update for first edition and second edition.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to actually update some of the monsters for first edition. So even though I had basically just jumped over to second edition, I still got to play around in the first edition rule set for a while.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. What was it like working for something like that? Because it's a little bit different. Because it's not often do you get a company that's like, here is all the tools to do a sandbox campaign. Usually it's like, here's a module, here's an adventure, follow
Yeah.
this A, B, C, D. These are your three options. But they've kind of like, here's how to do something sandboxy and kind of open campaign creative for people that are new.
Yeah, so I liked the idea that they had, so it was kind of like being sort of a sandbox game. It was kind of like playing with the homebrew campaign you've always wanted to create.
Mm-hmm.
You have all these different threads that you can follow and all these different directions that you can go in. And even when I was playing the video game, I was running up to that old like classic RPG problem where in computer RPGs we're like, oh, I can't go there yet. There's something that is too high level and will kill me.
Right.
So I have to find somewhere around and maybe do a little bit of grinding and come back. So even in its most modern iteration, it still definitely had some of that old school feel.
Yeah, that's true. Speaking of adventures, sandboxing, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the difference between writing an adventure path or a module for an adventure for a team versus working on stuff for like a source book or a player's guide or something like that, because they're two totally different things. So from your perspective, what is the difference putting those together?
Yeah, so unless there's something really, really unique that is coming down the pipe with your scenario or adventure, like I guess my best example to reference from that would be some of the new organized play campaigns or the organized play scenarios that are coming down the pipe with the God's Fall storyline
Yes.
are basically describing how different things are being shaken up all across Galarian. But when it comes to writing standard APs or scenarios, I feel that like it's more just utilizing the rules or the lore that's already there. Whereas writing for a source book, it's usually involved all the crunch, creating new rules, creating new content, more player-facing material than that would normally be in an adventure. And then sort of in a scenario, just seeing what the most interesting parts about the game that already exist that
Mm-hmm.
you can use to make an exciting story.
We've seen and talked about a little bit, building off of that. talking about building the crunch or the mechanics of something, of a system, and but also talking about building a story and throwing a story or creating a backstory and stuff like that. Where do you think your stronger suit lies in those two genres?
That's a good question. I think I like. I think my preference might be for the rules. I do enjoy creating rules that support the theme and support the story and have a lot of good cinematic uses that you can use in your adventure. Like doing the bard feats for the second player or the second edition player core was really, really fun because being such a feat based system, they sort of had to make each individual feat really, really thematic to give you a different feel for your character when you're choosing one feat over the other. So that was probably a really good experience for me, and I really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah, I love, even in home games when we were doing something, I sit back, I go, I want to accomplish this one thing. And there's no rules for it. What can I build to do this one thing that I want to do that still feels like it's within the system or something unique? So I agree.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fun to do that and kind of come up with those and implement those. So let's switch tracks. We've been talking about Pathfinder, your work with Pathfinder, Paizo, your other stuff you've done. Let's switch over to your current work that got us in touch with each other because you've worked on this role playing system that is tied into a very popular podcast. I'm a fan of it, called the Welcome to Night Vale podcast,
I
and you're
did.
doing the RPG for that.
Yes.
How well, first tell our audience kind of your thoughts on what Night Vale is as far as a podcast and what the theme of it is.
So, Welcome to Night Vale is the story of a supernatural southwestern desert town. It's hosted by their local radio host named Cecil Palmer, who sort of narrates all of the strange occurrences and reports on what's happening and the people that live in this little place. And it definitely has a excuse me, a very like spooky, suspenseful vibe. It definitely delves into the supernatural and the strange, and it's just generally a lot of fun.
What was your first intro into Welcome to Night Vale? And I know you've said this on other shows, and usually I avoid questions
Yeah.
that you've already stated multiple times. But I'm going to get it here. What kind of was your intro to it and your interactions with them?
So here in Seattle, I had a group of roommates in about 2012 or so. So this was about maybe 2013. So it was about a year after Night Vale had first come out. But my roommates were just such big fans of the show.
Right.
And I happened to share the name with one of the main characters, Carlos the Scientist.
Mm-hmm.
So when I moved in with these folks, they just started quoting the show around me, just like, "Oh, it's Carlos with his straight white teeth like a military cemetery," and I'm just like, "What is going on?" But I looked into it and I gave it a listen and started having a good time, and picked up on it from there.
That's great. So now they got this RPG. They've got all kinds of stuff. They're always working on something, whether they're doing live shows or the podcast or little one-offs or whatever it is they're doing. They've always got something new going on. How did this triumvirate of you and Renegade Games and the Night Vale people all kind of come together? Who went to who first, and how did that all come to be?
So initially, Elisa Teague, when she was with Renegade Studios, actually helped come up with the concept of bringing the Essence 20 role playing system to Night Vale through them because there's, as the backer kit has shown, just an enormous crossover between people who listen to podcasts and also play RPGs.
Yep.
And Jason Keeley, who is currently developer with Paizo, he went to Renegade for a little while, started working on Night Vale with Elisa, and then hopped back over to Paizo. And when that happened, he put out the call for someone to help develop the project further. And at that point, in addition to my previous tabletop RPG work, I started actually developing my own board game products and doing some other board game work for other companies at the same time. So I was familiar with actually doing the developing and trying to produce an actual product and not just doing, the fiction or the rules or
Right.
the lore and stuff like that too. So Jason was the one who gave me the referral to Renegade, and I started working on that a little over a year ago.
And do you know how they came to Renegade? That how that connection happened?
So Renegade approached the Night Vale team about doing the game,
Okay.
and they were the ones who were able to convince them that there was the market for this product, and a lot of people who loved
Right.
Night Vale wanted to actually play in this world.
Okay.
So when I came on the project, Bree Williams, who is the one of the Night Vale staff writers, she had written the Visitor's Guide, which is basically your campaign setting book about what Night Vale actually is and
Right.
all these places and people that live there. That was already done when I came on board.
Oh,
So
nice.
I was hired to finish the project and work with the other writers to write the additional content to get that done.
Okay. Nice. So when you're putting the game together, Night Vale, and here's something that I've always been curious about. Night Vale has a very unique feel to it. It's Cthulhu, but it's not Cthulhu.
Yeah.
It's kind of silly, but it's actually also kind of serious. It's got a really serious tone for the sake of humor.
hmm
How do you pull that into the RPG without it seeming too much like a Cthulhu game or too much like a, oh, this is just a joke game? How do you keep that in your system and keep that balance? Or are you putting that on the whoever the game master is?
So one of the things that we did to sort of approach that is kind of make it a game about investigation, trying to explore the town and find out what exactly is happening that these other characters, just like in the podcast, are reporting on. So it's kind of like I guess, a creepier Scooby Doo is, I guess, a good way to describe it. I haven't
Okay.
used before.
Okay.
Um, but not only do you have the option of potentially playing an intern at Night Vale Community Radio, you could also play these other characters who are residents of the town in various ways. And you're ultimately trying to find out what is going on with this current problem Night Vale is having and how weird and strange can it actually get.
And is there a musical interlude in the middle? I gotta know.
I mean, there might be.
And right now
I'm
it's the
actually
end of the world. We're gonna play a song.
yes. So Renegade is planning to have an actual play of the scenario I'm writing for the stretch goals that have no backer kit.
Okay.
So they already did a great video for us on what Night Vale is and how you play the game on the backer kit page. But working with Good Time Society on that has been a lot of fun.
That's hilarious. Um, Often with podcasts, and I know you touched on it earlier when we're talking about some of the characters. Often in the podcast, Cecil's kind of your main character.
Mhm.
There are other characters, but he is the main character, and you see everything for the most part through his eyes. How do you tackle a game where it's not just one main character; it's a team? And you mentioned that it's kind of like a creepy Scooby Doo. Was that in the plans? Was that something that was a big part of the discussion? Was how do we keep this for a group of role players?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been able to do, thankfully, is basically through the entire process, confirm what works with the Night Vale team and getting their approval process involved. So everything that we've written gets notes from them on how to make sure it really fits the theme of the world. But for the adventure that is in the box set that we'll be releasing, Cecil actually introduces what the problem is to the players, and you go to different locations in Night Vale and speak to other NPCs that you probably seen in the podcast and try to basically find out what the mystery is.
A lot of the game, a lot of the show is the city folk know, they know, but they don't divulge
Yeah,
it. That's part of the fun of the show when you're listening to it. It's like, yes, the but nobody goes to the dog park because everybody knows you don't go to the dog park. But we as the
exactly.
audience don't have any clue what's in there, and that's part of the
hmm
horror, right? So you as a game designer and knowing that the well, what happens if we go there? They're going to have to explore that. So then you're going to have to
Yep.
stat that out, and that kind of pulls the curtain back. How do you balance that part of that out between giving it away but not giving it away?
So the visitor's guide that Bree had written up for us, that was a great reference for how to look at what's going on in the Night Vale worlds pretty much as far as last year, what the current status of everything was. But that's just basically highlights on the locations and the NPCs or the characters from Night Vale that you'll encounter there. When approaching it from the rest of the game design standpoint, we have several story hooks for each of the threats or creatures that you will encounter in Night Vale. So even if they're not being used in the adventure that we actually have in the box set, there's already ideas to actually explore further mysteries and other weird happenings that happen in Night Vale as well.
I see in the picture for the box set, there are
Mhm.
there are cards, there are maybe tokens. Can you kind of explain what the uses for those are for our listening audience?
Yeah, so the box set will contain four main volumes. It's the Visitor's Guide to introduce you to Night Vale. There's the Citizen's Guide, which is the player handbook on how to create a character and how the game works. There's the Host Guide, which is the GM companion, and that basically gives you the more details on how the Essence 20 role-playing system is run and how to run a session for other people. And then there's the Skeleton Gorge Adventure, which is one of the famous locations of Night Vale you get to experience. In addition to that, we have a basic dice set that comes with every box. There is a backer kit exclusive dice set that you are able to get if you pledge to the backer kit campaign. And if you got the deluxe version, you also got a dice bag, a dice tray, and the deluxe exclusive dice set, which I cannot wait to show people. It's absolutely gorgeous.
That's awesome.
But
Our dice goblins are gonna love it.
yeah, so potentially three new sets of dice if you went deluxe.
Oh,
Um, and then there was, of course, the retail pledge for multiple copies for retail stores, which will be out this summer for everyone to enjoy. And the handouts for the game are basically some of the NPCs, not NPCs, the pre-gens.
okay.
We have 11 pre-gens that come out of the box for the core set. There is 9 threats that aren't exclusive to the adventure. You'll already see a handful of threats in the adventure that you can also use to spook your players in your game. And the stretch goals contain 3 new pre-gen characters and 4 new threats for people who pitched in for the backer kit.
Awesome. Was it hard to translate as far as mechanics go? We talked a little bit earlier about you're wanting to do mechanics. Was it easy or difficult to take some of the characters and kind of translate them mechanically into the game, or are they not statted? Are the characters not statted?
So we do actually have stats for some of the famous NPCs or characters in Night Vale. Cecil Palmer being one of them, Carlos the Scientist, the faceless old woman who lives in your home.
She's
Um,
absolutely in your home, just out of sight.
mhm. And we, what was good about using the Essence 20 role-playing game for all of this is that I've always called it like the perfect blend of a D20 game and a storytelling system.
Okay.
Because using the dice system that Essence 20 utilizes, where you increase the die in your dice pool that you roll with your d20 instead of just using all these crunchy numbers in a single die, it allows you to sort of escalate your skill levels and your progression as you go to achieve the task at hand. So normally when you do a skill test in Essence 20, you roll your d20 and then you take your skill that comes from one of your 4 essences. And those are strength, speed, smarts, and social.
Okay.
And you start off with a d2 if you put one of your essence points into that particular stat, but you'll put that D2 into one of the skills associated with one of those essences. So you might only start with a D2, but then you go from a D4, a D6, and a D8 all the way up to a D12. And if you specialize in something, say you want to specialize in climbing for athletics,
Okay.
you would take your D20 or your D6. And if you're specialized in it, you would take the D6 and then the D4 and the D2 and everything lower and roll them all at the same time
Oh,
and use the highest number.
okay. Nice.
But one of the things we're doing very, very special for Welcome to Night Vale is actually introducing a skill that does not exist in any of the other Essence 20 games. So it was sort of the brainchild of one of our writers, Shay Snow, they said that, can I introduce a new skill similar to how it works functionally with like spellcasting in the My Little Pony game, but something directly for Welcome to Night Vale? And I said, absolutely. And it's called the weird skill. So with
Can
all
you
of the
spell that just so we know?
strange,
Just so we know.
yeah, it's weird.
Okay.
Um, all of the weird skill isn't tied to any one of your essences. So say I think it's 16 essence points you have to start a character at level 1. Instead of putting it into social strength or speed or anything like that, you just put it into weird. You take the perk that allows you to invest in the skill, and then you basically have a special knack for dealing with all of the strange things you're encountering at night, though.
That's fun. That's great. I love it. Did you get to talk with any of the performers that do the voices or the actors and get their insights as well, or was it just kind of the writers?
It was mostly the producers at Night Vale that I was reporting to in charge of the project. But during the development of the game, I was able to attend their 10th anniversary live show that they were touring around the world with. That happened here in Seattle, where I'm located, and I did get a chance to meet Symphony Sanders, who voices Tamika Flynn.
Okay,
And Symphony is great. She was really sweet.
that's great. Awesome. I'm very excited for the game. I look forward to it. People definitely check out Welcome to Night Vale the RPG and the podcast because it's ridiculous fun. I've been a fan of the show for a very long time. Let's talk about something else. You got this coronation game, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, how that came to be, because it sounds really fun. It sounds really cool, and I kind of like where you were going when you sent the email.
Yeah, so Coronation is a coin flipping push your luck game with knights and rulers that my daughter actually designed when she was 5 years old. When I basically started to pivot from RPGs to board games, I had sold my first design, and literally a month later, she came up with this great idea. We were just flipping coins on the couch, and I was teaching her how to do that. And then she was like, well, what if you put knights on one side, crowns on the other? And I'm like, this is something I think I can do something with. Please give me more. And it's actually currently being developed and being shopped around to publishers this year.
Okay,
And hopefully we'll be able to get that signed, but we do have the means to self-publish if we need to. And hopefully in a couple of years, that'll be out in the world.
awesome. Sounds fun. Do you have any other upcoming projects you want to talk about? Anything else that we don't know about? Anything you're working on that you can talk about but maybe can't tell too much about?
Well, we're just about wrapping up the last bits of Night Vale right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that is most, I think we're just going into the final edits before the last stretch goals go to the factory for production. So we're almost done with that right now. And that will be out at the summer.
Okay.
One of the things that made the campaign so great to work on is that, the Night Vale fans just came out in force for
Yeah.
it. In 2024, we were the top 7 projects of all projects on BackerKit as far as amount raised, and number 3 in backers. And in regards to just RPGs alone, we finished number 7. We finished number 9 in amount raised and number 6 in backers. So just thank you to everyone who helped work on that project. It's almost here. The PDFs will drop probably April for those who pledged, and then this summer it'll be out in your hands.
That's great. And I can't wait to see it out at conventions and stuff and get in on some of the games. And maybe I'll run some games too if I figure out if I'm good enough to figure it out.
You will definitely see it at Gen Con as well.
Excellent, excellent. And you will be at Gen Con. That's on July 31st and through August 3rd, correct?
Yes,
And that's
I've got a lot of things I'll be doing this year in regards to conventions. We have so many here in Seattle as it is.
yeah.
I don't know my final schedule, but I will be speaking online at Indie Design Week for people who usually attend Gen Con and go to that market as well. The following week, I'll be in here in Seattle doing NorwestCon, which is for science fiction and fantasy, speaking on several panels there. At the end of this month, I'll be attending Gamma if you are able to go and want to talk about games and stuff there, network.
That's in
That'll be great.
Louisville, Kentucky.
And then I'll be at Gen Con as well, and then PAX West, since that is also very, very huge here.
Yeah, why? I mean, you're in Seattle. You might as well go to all of the things
Might
in
as well go.
Seattle. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Awesome. Your socials. You have a website, carloscabrera.carrd.co, correct?
That one is actually my old one. If you
The
go
old
to
one. See, I'm glad I said it because
there you go. If you go to somethingclevergames.com, you'll see all the work that myself and my business partner Benjamin have done in the past. And that's where you can also sign up for our newsletter for what's coming down the pipe later on this year. And then I'm usually Carlos at SCG on other sites like Twitter and Blue Sky and Facebook as well.
and also renegadegamestudios.com has the Welcome to Night Vale stuff. You can also check them out at Facebook Play RPGS or no RGS Play RGS because
Yes.
it's not RPG because it's Renegade Game Studios. Play
Yep.
RGS on Instagram renegade_game_studios or on Twitter/X at Play Renegade. You can get all of their links there. So
And
check all those things out.
You can still pre-order Night Vale there too if you haven't picked up a copy already.
Yes, do it. Pre-order it. I want to hear all of the people that are going to be playing Welcome to Night Vale. People, if you are in the live streams and you have questions, please throw them in there. We will get to them here in just a bit during our post-stream Q&A. So definitely get those questions in there. But first, I'm going to let you all know coming up, returning to Epic Realms, we're going to be having best-selling author of the Iron Druid Chronicles, Seven Kennings, and more, the one and only master himself, Kevin Hearn, is going to be joining us for his return to Epic Realms. That's going to be live February 24th, and that podcast will be available on the 25th. Also, we're going to have Allison Saibi, game designer, is going to be joining us. Also, the author and RPGer James Sutter is going to be joining us as well. Comics legend Jim Zub is going to be joining us. So please rate, review, follow, subscribe, push all of those buttons. Make sure you get notifications for when we go live. And those ratings and reviews, guys, those ratings and reviews really help us. They help our guests, they help us, they help everybody. So please make sure to do that. So for Carlos Cabrera, I am Nick, and I want to thank you all for listening to Epic Realms.